So since we don't have any questions in queue just yet, I'm going to start going over a little bit of details on our pre-built account. You guys may have heard about this new account that new users who signed up after December 11th will be starting out with. And essentially, it just gives new users the base information to then customize and make their own. So with that, again, feel free to post up Q&A questions. We'll pivot to those as they start coming through. But in our pre-built account, just a few things to highlight here. This account that I'm in does have our pre-built information. So I'm just going to do a little run through. And with our pre-built account, we do have some standard fields that have been kept neutral. So that way you guys can either use these as your base fields to start, rename them, make them more state specific, and add in any fields that may be missing for your area. As you can see with this, it's a fairly standard layout for your fields and your field groups. But we have included this OTC1 in the title of some of these naming conventions to notate this comes from our pre-built account. The real powerhouse of what's included with a pre-built, though, is the templates that we've added in. These are very neutral. They are not necessarily state specific, but they're built around more of an escrow state type process. So there is in total, I think, just about 150 total email templates in the pre-built account, about 32 total task templates. And with those, we tried to focus on some of those key parts of your contract, like home warranty, referral, septic, survey, your main under contract tasks, finance appraisal, etc. So the idea is you guys can start working through these, make your changes as necessary, and then from there, start testing and implementing. We also have 2 intake forms included in the pre-built account. These are pre-built with our templates already connected in. So if you guys are starting with our pre-built account, you just want to get an idea of what's included, you can come to these intake forms that are flagged with OTC1 and see how we've approached that. There are some additional things that you can add through, like this is our test account. We've been playing around with some notification emails. Make them your own, but the core of our current processes are already built out. So you could start testing, potentially even using this within a couple of days, depending on how many changes you make. Realistically, though, I think we've been running into this question a lot of what does setup look like with open to close. A lot of that depends on where you're coming from and what you're trying to build in your account. So we'll go over that a little bit later. We are working on some additional onboarding content that we can provide to new users that are getting their account set up. So keep an eye out for that in the next couple of months. We will be doing some phases of different types of contents being released for you guys. Otherwise, it looks like we have some Q&A questions, so I'm going to pivot back to that.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I wanted to add on that too is that if anyone is an existing user and they're like, maybe I just need a refresher, it's been a minute, or you're new to the new features, those calls would be good for you too. They would be beneficial for any user at any kind of stage, but mainly we're gearing it towards the new people.
You mentioned calls. I'm going to clarify group sessions.
Oh, group
part
sessions.
Of what we're,
my bad.
we're looking at setting up there too. So
yeah,
can keep an eye out as you guys have suggestions as well. We take to heart what you guys are needing with your onboarding experience. So let us know, and we're here to help on that.
Definitely.
First question we have here, I'm trying to create a field counter that will notify me 7, 14, 30 days before listing agreement is expiring. Any ideas? Great question there. So with reminders, so this to me sounds a lot like 3 reminders all built around the listing agreement expiration date, depending on which account you're starting out with. If you're starting on our Grow plan or our Premium plan, you are going to be using a task-based system. So at that point, I would recommend creating a task that can provide those reminders for us. If you're on our Scale plan, we have what we call property triggers, which could be another option that is not necessarily task-based, but could queue up those reminders still based on the timeline that you mentioned there, Jeffrey. So let's do a little quick build on this one, if that's okay. We won't do the entire template, but I'll give you guys an idea of what this would look like. So it's 30 days. Listing expiration. I'm terrible at spelling in the moment.
I think it's got an I instead of an E. So you
Oh,
were
yeah.
really close.
So with that, I would look to see it as likely calendar days. I would choose my before option. And I'm just going to look and see if we already have this field in here. So starting out with our field, what you're trying to do is base reminders around a listing agreement expiration date. We need to verify that that date is in your account. I know this account pretty well, so I knew that it's already in here. And most users, I believe, start with this field with their seed account details. But if you don't have the field, a quick fix, just pop into your field editor, add that in. But then I could have this task prompt 30 calendar days before listing agreement expiration. If I need to add in any rollover options to that task, I can. Otherwise, once that task is generated, I can then add in a trigger. So what
Hey,
type
Jenna,
of
I don't
notification?
want to interrupt you here, but I do want to call some attention to that NA that you were showing there on the date calculation, just because I know that could trip some people up. These calculations for this NA doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be applicable so much as if you plug something in, it's going to overwrite whatever the default for the property is. However, if your property has defaults already set and you have NA set up on the specific date field here, it's going to default to whatever your property is telling it to do, whether that's roll back, roll forward, whatever it might be. So just something to keep in mind. If you put NA, it's not saying disregard this. It's saying look to the default of the property. So just want to call that out.
That's definitely a good point. It is a trickle down. So if you're using intake forms and you have it set in your intake forms, it'll go off your intake forms. If you have it set in your date template, it'll go off your date template. If you have it set on your task template, it'll go off your task template.
Yeah, and that's a good topic. If you guys ever have questions on the rollover setup, we
might touch on it at the end. I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, if we have enough time. Because it is a really good topic we've seen more and more of lately, is just how does my defaults and settings work with the specific rollover options that we can set in these individual templates. So really good point there, Matthew. Can we make note of that, Hannah, if we have enough time at the end just to circle back there?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So with that in mind, to your point there, what type of notification would you be wanting there, Jeffrey? Email, text message would be what we're considering. That is a trigger. And so what I would come over here and do is my lightning icon where I can create this trigger for that notification piece. So am I sending this when the task is not completed, when the task is completed, and then from there, is it an email or text? So depending on when you want this to queue up and who's being notified, if this is just an internal notification to yourself, I would actually likely do a task not completed. So that way we could do a auto send. Let's just pretend this is a text message. I put in beautiful content there. What I would then do is come in and set up what we call a contingency. So if this task is not completed, when would we want this trigger to fire off or queue up? So right now it's not defined, which means as soon as this task is due, I believe it would queue up. So if I come in and select this not defined link, it's going to give me this window where I can choose the time of day. This reminder could queue up and go out. I personally like to have 9 a.m. on reminders and some of my email triggers getting queued up. Sometimes I like to give myself a little window to catch this. Maybe I already got confirmation we're good to go on this listing agreement and we extended. From there, I can choose my time frame. Do I want this to go out a day after? Do I want this to go out the same day as this task is due? That's going to be very similar to how we build our task date option, is being able to have control of when that trigger actually can queue up and go out. Once I update that, in this case, I chose 12 p.m. same day as task is due, then it's going to reflect that in this contingency now moving forward. And then the last thing that I would need to add in, send listing expiration reminder.
You guys know what I always say. Add in your details, know what your trigger is.
Very, very helpful. Because that one, it's a subtle thing. You don't think it has as big of an impact when we're in our tasks, but when you start to have a lot of triggers on your property record, it really can just help get that bird's eye view of what's going on. But the last thing that we'll see here is just how do I want this trigger to go out? From your message there, Jeffrey, it sounds like it's a notification to yourself. And so this probably is a pretty straightforward message, just saying, hey, listing expiration for this address is in 30 days. We may be able to trigger that email to go out automatically if this task is not completed. So that is a rough build out. We don't necessarily have enough time to go over every single piece of this task trigger and the task itself. Like, I'm going to have additional fields here because I'm on the scale plan. It gives me additional options when it comes to this. But the basic structure of this right here would likely be a good approach for a task-based reminder for those types of due dates. The final thing that I would want to note is that it's still going to have the task sitting there for you. Even if that trigger goes out, I'm still going to want to come into that property and check this task off as complete to say, okay, I'm done with this reminder acknowledgement. I can move on. So if you're on our scale plan using property triggers, it takes away the task and it just queues up the trigger based on your timeline. The only caveat with that is we don't have auto send for property triggers at this time. So hope that helps with your question. If you have follow-ups on that one, Jeffrey, feel free to post back in this thread.
The only thing I wanted to add is we wanted to turn on the trigger.
Yeah.
Just in case. I feel like most of you guys know this, but when you do see it gray like this, it means it's not on. When we flip that switch that Jan is about to touch, that means that it's on. Once it turns green, it's on. Once we see that that lightning bolt with the 1 icon on it, that means it's on as well when you're looking at that task. So yeah, we want to turn off the automatic, and here we can see, if you close it now, Jana. And this is mainly because I see a couple of you guys that are in implementation with me. This is how you know that this trigger is actually active. You have to see that 1. If you add the trigger on there and you don't turn it on, it's not going to fire off.
And that's really useful in case you're maybe working on, you're working on a trigger, you're not quite ready for it to somebody's, this is a task template that I am actively using. I'm working on something and I'm not quite ready for this to go out yet. That you want to make sure it stays, gray like that. But yeah, once you're ready, go ahead and enable that and you're good to go.
Yeah, no, that one's kind of nice. My rule of thumb is I prefer not to delete in the system. I can deactivate most things.
Turn it off.
I can hide things, and I can also reorganize things into archive sections. So if you guys are hitting trash cans on your templates a lot, just keep in mind you can always come back to it if you deactivate it. Gives you a base to build off of in the future.
Awesome.
Next question we have here is on intake forms and tasks as well. How do I actually get my tasks to apply in my intake form? So I'm just going to read off this fully. I am trying to get my tasks set up with my intake form. I have added the tasks in the templates, but I'm not seeing how to actually get them into the intake form. So
do you mind if I take this one?
Sure.
Cool. So we're going to head down to our intake form. You already have your task templates on there. Let's go ahead and say edit on our intake form, and we're going to head straight to our intake questions first. Sarah, I know what your setup is, and that's the reason why I wanted to take this question. So first things first, we want to figure out what is going to be the condition to bring those tasks on. In your account right now, you might have a set of questions similar to this. So if we're trying to get on our main buyers under contract tasks, that's pretty easy. We can say that the condition is if it is equal to buyer, then we're good. But if we're talking about those specific tasks that I mentioned before, where we're kind of getting a little more granular, this is my HOA task template. This is for my home warranty. This is for my septic. Here, we're going to determine what questions we want to ask. Make sure we're asking them on the intake form. Make sure we're having that answer come in on the right-hand side. So left-hand side is asking on the intake form. Right-hand side is saying, bring that answer onto the property once it's been submitted. Once you feel good about those, we're going to head over to our form triggers. Now, under form triggers, some of you guys might already have triggers there. We're going to click on trigger options. This is going to expand that view. Let us see what's on here. So the first thing I would suggest is take a look at the sort triggers to see what do I have. And this is where, remember how Jana had said, the details are so crucial. This is where you're going to be able to see what's already existing in your account. If you're customizing the pre-built account, some of these triggers might already be built out, so you might not need to create them again. If you have to create them new, I'll go over that in just a moment, but I want you guys to reference the sort triggers when you're kind of looking through and going, well, I added in or I loaded in my own task template for HOA. check out the sort triggers, see, do we have a trigger for HOA? I can see it. It's like the second to the top underneath the, what is this peachy color? It says buyer's HOA tasks. So all we'd have to do is locate that. We can either scroll to it, or we can do Command or Control F and search on that page for HOA. So you guys kind of know this. So here you can see, as we start to go through, we can see that there's 11 places that HOA are at. This means that there's other triggers that are using HOA, whether it's a field or a field section. Definitely take a look at it. Your trigger assets will tell you what that trigger does. Keep going down, Jana. And then once we get down to our task templates, it's going to say that it's the task template one. Now, once we get to this trigger, if the trigger is already existing, we can click on templates. Here we can decide, do we want to keep the document template that's already there? Do we want to add on new task templates? Here we have the option to delete them or remove them. As I've mentioned before, I usually suggest dealing in additives, like adding on things. So as you go, if it's a yes, then bring it on. However, you can also set it up to remove things. Let's say we wanted to remove a task template. That's where Jana just clicked for add or remove. It defaults to add. That's why I say stick with add. Now, if you need to create a brand new trigger, anything to add on that though, Jana, or do you feel like that was a good, covered that?
Yeah, it's just tying it back into those intake questions. If you already have that question being asked and this task template that you're trying to pull into your intake form is built off of the same logic, just add it into the same trigger, like we're saying here with the assets.
Easy peasy.
The need for creating a separate intake form trigger is if your condition logic is not the same, or if I'm dealing with a different type of trigger. So if I'm using, like we're saying earlier, like templates versus field sections that we see here versus the individual fields, those are different trigger types. So they would need to be separate so that way we can pull in that specific type of record to your property. So that's the only thing I would want to make sure you guys know. Is like, that's why your fields and versus your field sections are separate, is you may need that control to say, I want to add in my field section every time versus I only want to add in this one field from this field section.
Beautiful.
Otherwise, yeah.
Awesome. So let's start talking about adding in a trigger. So here up at the top, scroll to the top, add trigger. Here we're choosing the action. Submitted by agent is when that agent submits that intake form. What do we want to do? I typically suggest keeping all your fields on that one, your field sections, or just individual fields. Maybe you even want to add in, an email or two to say, send it directly to this particular address. I want to email our team and let them know, we've gone under contract or we've received a new intake form.
I'm going to add in one thing to that.
Absolutely.
Too.
Please do.
Document templates that house your placeholders for your beginning contracts. I like to add in on the form submitted side. So as I'm approving my intake form and approving my documents, I have a place to assign them. Yeah, so that's the other thing that I like to add in on that side.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I agree. I second that motion. Absolutely. If you guys want and I would say do your main one, right? Because HOA, you might get that later on down the line, but your main list of documents, when you get that main contract, that's a really great idea to put it on the agent submitted. Now, form approved. What this does, this allows you guys as, TCs or building it out for your TCs to give your TCs the chance to double check to make sure, is all the information correctly? Do we actually need an HOA or an inspection, or do we not need it? And so saying approved internally, we'll have the option to alter those answers if we need to. Here underneath trigger function, we have a couple different options. Add or remove template is what we're going to want to do to bring on those task templates. It'll also allow us to bring on document templates. It'll also allow us to bring on a date template. And if you're on the scale plan, it'll allow you to bring on those trigger templates as well. So Jana, if you want to go ahead and say add or remove template, and we'll say add. And again, she's choosing form approved. And the main reason is because we want your TCs to have the chance to double check the information, validate that it's good, and then go forward. Go ahead and choose any random template that you want from here. We can always get back to this screen. So Jana's going to click one. She's going to say add. Now it's on there. Awesome. Cool. We can say close out of this. Here we have that trigger. We can either click on where it says options in that little drop down, or we can click on trigger options. Either one's fine. Now we have the shell of the trigger. Add in your details. I always like to, sometimes you guys will see me, I'll just copy whatever it says the trigger assets are and I paste it into the details. That's fine too. When it's purple or right now kind of like a bluish color, that means it hasn't saved yet. You'll want to press enter on your keyboard. When it goes from purple to gray, you know you're good. Okay. Next things next, Jenna, if you want to turn it on, just flip the switch at the bottom.
I was muted. I'm actually going to throw a little caveat to that.
Oh, okay,
I normally best practice, I turn it on once I'm done.
Oh,
so that way I know
okay.
this trigger is ready to go, but you know, either which way,
Either way.
at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's
it does
actually
make it a little
point.
easier to see.
Yeah. And that makes a really good point for anyone who's building right now. If you feel good with it, having it off, that way, you know, for sure it's not going to fire off. Perfect. Because the next thing we need to do for this is we need to add on that condition. So if you remember at the beginning, I was saying, check out your fields, make sure your questions are being asked. That way, when you add on your condition, we're going to say property field. For the most part, when you're talking about the trigger conditions, you're always going to be dealing with property fields. There could be an instance where you need to deal with a file role or a contact role. If you guys are thinking of, oh, maybe I want to do it for this, ask me in the, feel free to drop that question in the Q&A and we'll go over the use case for those other two. But for now, go ahead and click on property field, Jana. So it's going to ask us, what is our condition type? A property field. It's one of those fields we looked at. Now, what is the field? And we're going to look for that question. So if you see at the top of this, it says contract question OTC1. That is the field section. Underneath that, that's the question. So we'll select the question. Next, we're going to say, what's the operation? Like I mentioned, I like to deal with positives. It's the easiest way to know, is this set up correctly? Well, if it's equal to yes, then I know it's going to come on. Now, this is a little bit of a double negative, right? Because it says equal to no, but it's asking, our initial question is waived inspection contingency. Well, no, we're not waiving it. That's why we're going to say equal to no. Go ahead and say add that on. Now, once we've added that on, that's added that first top condition. We can always add on additional conditions. If you're building out an intake form that's taking care of your buyer side, seller side, you can add on an additional condition to say, well, if the property field, and thank you, Jennifer, just going at it really quick. Here we can see if the property field contract client type is equal to buyer, then we want the buyer's inspection task template to come on. So now we have these two conditions. It needs to meet both of these. Let's say we wanted to create a child condition. It's exactly what Jana's doing right now. She clicked on where it said field, and then now she's filling it out. At the top, it says important. You're creating a child condition. It will always say that if you're creating a child condition. So that's how you're going to be able to check, okay, when I'm creating either or, I need it to say child condition. So go ahead and add something in there.
I'm going to
do
a little highlight. So this is one I've started to do a little bit more lately. The reason being is just, safety net for myself, catching my personal user error.
Mm-hmm.
If I, for some reason, did not answer that intake question of, no, we did not waive our right to inspections, what if I still put in an inspection deadline for this? Would I still want to apply my inspection task template? That's where that child condition can be handy. And I actually chose that is not equal to, or is not blank, sorry. So that way, if there's no date in the home inspection due date field, I don't need that task template. But if there is a deadline, that can be an or condition to say either we said, no, we didn't waive, or no, we actually do have a deadline, it looks like. So just wanted to throw out there, I was using different operator.
Awesome. No, I think that's perfect. The last thing I want to mention is that conditions like to fire in order. So right now it's going to say first, waived inspection contingency equal to no. So actually just, focusing on the conditions. Right now it'll ask us, not this field. Here. So it'll go off of, is it this first or is it this? So I always like to say reorder them. Your buyer is the first thing you're going to know, right? All you have to do is drag and drop it. You can either drag it from the arrow or even in the middle where it says contract client type, Jana, if you want to grab it from there, you can drag and drop it from any point in there to make sure that we're kind of keeping that in order. No worries. So now we want it to say, buyer first, because we're going to know that answer first, right? That's the first information that comes in. And the next thing is the waived inspection contingency. Now that we've built this trigger out, we're going to want to sort it because it's not technically in the right place. So when we click on sort triggers here, we can see we've got all the green grouped at the top and all the red grouped at the bottom, or the peachy color grouped at the bottom. What I typically suggest is we're going to take that peachy color and we're going to bring it all the way down and we're going to put it not at the very bottom, but we're going to put it in the group where all the other Peachy templates are.
And the reason for that is?
Oh, because it fires off in order. Remember how I said the conditions fire off in order? So do the triggers. Almost everything in the system likes to fire off in order. So if you guys keep it in this nice organized view, this is the order of my questions. This is the order of my fields. Things are going to go really smooth. It won't be loading as long. So that's why I always stress, if you guys are keeping it in order, then it's going to know, it'll go check this. Okay, we're good. Check this. Okay, we're good. And continuing down the line.
Other thing with that too.
Yeah.
Is if you don't have your fields on the property and those fields are used in condition logic in your task templates, like things aren't going to queue up correctly. So adding your fields first, making sure those are always top of the list here, that is going to ensure accuracy with the rest of the things that you've built.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, the number one things that we see when troubleshooting intake forms is I'm not even asking the question on my intake form, but it's being used in this logic. And so this is where we say fields are the foundation of your whole account. They're tied into all of this. And so, there's a lot of different strategies with intake forms in particular too. Say if you guys have any specific questions on that, definitely reach out, let us know. We are looking to have a specific intake forms group setup call with these new resources that we're developing. So that will be coming here down the line for us to have a little bit more focused setup sessions on these areas of the system. Awesome. But hope that helped, and thank you, Hannah, for going through all of that very, very thorough with all of those setup steps. So with that,
I just want to piggyback on what you guys were just talking about and the importance of order. When I've been troubleshooting with some clients, we found some very interesting moments because, again, it starts from top to bottom, right? It's going to start processing those from the top going through. And I've seen some clients maybe do something like, oh, remove these fields, I don't need them. But then they had other triggers below that says, oh, look for this field to figure out if we need to do it, but they've removed it. And so now the system's like, oh, I don't know, I don't see that field. It's not going to validate that condition because it's like, oh, I don't see the field because you've removed it. And obviously you don't want the system running off a field you can't see. So if you're removing things, I generally do recommend putting that towards the bottom. If you're adding things towards the top, if you're removing things, do that last, just because there has been that little bit of the confusion of what happened here, and that was why. So.
Definitely. I think something to add on to that too, because some of you guys have seen it. If you've already upgraded to the new pricing plan, check out that field introspector in your fields. It will show you where all of those fields are being used, what questions are being used. All we have to do is go to our field editor, click on that eye, boom. Here we see where everything is associated.
Yeah, that's a nice
I'm really glad you
It's
brought that up
very
because a
handy.
lot of people actually, when they hear the term field introspector, what is that? What is that?
Yeah.
This is exactly it. And it's very useful. It is.
Yeah.
Big tool for powerful features with it. This one has been actually really huge with customizing accounts. And just, we mentioned it earlier. We rule of thumb, don't delete if we can avoid it. Either we will deactivate something or we'll put it into an archived field section or even sometimes a field group for it. So very, very, very helpful. Again, that is on our version 2 pricing plan. So if you're still on V1, you will not see that introspector per se, but if you have questions, would like to upgrade, reach out, let us know. I do want to, before we move on, we just went through a lot of troubleshooting on intake forms, and I'm sure in the back of some of your minds is like, how do I actually go through and see what happened with my intake form triggers?
Yeah.
If you haven't seen this already, when you come to your property records and your health bar here, when you click on your health bar, you're going to see intake approval and intake submission. This particular property was not created through an intake form because, well, there's no triggers here. Nothing happened. Either that or we just didn't build in the back end. But I think this was a manual property, so not the best example. Let me see if I can find a different one. The system will show you what fired off when this intake form was submitted and when it was approved. And then you can go through and actually see the logic behind it. So definitely keep an eye out for these tabs again in your health bar on your property. If you're troubleshooting and you're trying to backtrack, why didn't this template get added to my record? Again, it oftentimes can go back to those conditions, maybe the order of how it was added. So
definitely. Yeah.
Next question we see here is on smart blocks. Love it. So let me pull that up. I lost my QA screen.
It says, hi, when using smart blocks for a date, the date will come into the email, but not the time. Is there a way to fix this? The time showing in the field is coming in, but not. So I would want to take a look at it. But Jana, if you want to open up a smart block.
Sorry, I completely lost my Q&A screen.
No, you're totally good. And any one of them is fine. The EDM offer accepted is fine, or maybe the inspection responsibilities, something like that would be fine too.
I'm actually just going to add in.
Create a new one. Yeah, definitely.
This one is handy.
It's funny that it popped up too, and it was like suggested, like we can see the autofill. So we've kind of
I recently created it.
We did, yeah. We recently ran into this, so it's a great question, Katie.
Yeah. So with this, I went pretty quick there. To create a new smart block, hammer icon, you're going to see your smart block tab under here, which should open this right-hand panel. If you are getting comfortable with our keyboard shortcuts in the system, Control S will also pop up the smart block window. From there, it is nice just to do a quick search to see if you already have a smart block that you can repurpose and use. Otherwise, to add new is going to be with this purple button. If this is not a purple button, it is a green button. That means you're on our smart block groups, which is slightly different. We can touch on that a bit later. That being said, we created new, which is this home inspection date and time. So I'm going to pretend like this is just a little snippet that I'm going to add in when I'm doing opening emails to say if the inspection's already been scheduled or not. So
perfect.
I'm going to go a little scrappy on this. I would probably do more as a TC in my email update.
Yeah.
How I do this. So first thing with merge fields, to open up your merge field window when you're working in email templates, text templates, smart blocks, you're going to see this 3-line checklist icon. When I click on that, it should open a left-hand window for myself to see these different tabs and the fields and details within them. So my fields tab, it is what you expect to see. These are all the fields in your account. From there, contact roles, you can see all the contact roles in your account. And then when you click on that role, it will expand and show you the individual fields you can pull. And then smart blocks we'll touch on a bit later. In this case, I need to find my field for the home inspection date and time. We'd actually love, Matthew, if you could clarify this too, because I ran into this the other day. There's 3 different merge fields for this one field here. The first one is for the home inspection date. And that's the title that I just clicked on. When I clicked on that, you can see quickly there, it has been copied to my clipboard. And this merge field is just for the home inspection date. It does not include the time. Perfect. So if I want to include the time for this field, I'm actually going to come over to the start and end button. When I click on this, it is a slightly different merge field that is being copied to my clipboard. And it should show that this is the home inspection date with the start time. My question, Matthew, if you can clarify, confirm, is it just the time or does it also include the date in that as well? I feel like it's just the time. But
I think it might bring in both, but we can test it out because this is actually a really good point here to kind of see, okay, is it going to bring in the date and the time, but also, Katie, do we have it that a time is required for that field? Yeah. So that would be the kind of the other part. This is how you'd build it out so it could bring in those particular fields. Jan is adding on a condition. That way that smart block populates correctly. And we'll kind of show you what it looks like to see what that field looks like on a property. So Jana, if you want to, let's just check out to make sure that I mean, it says it has it, we know it has it, but let's go over to our field editor and just make sure that whenever you're looking at your fields and you want to see, does this ask for a date or a time specifically? I want to look at them and I want to show you guys, when we click onto any of the fields, it's totally fine. Anyone that has a date, perfect. If we scroll to the bottom here, we have that is a time required for this date. So we can turn that on and it'll show up on the fields, right? When we're looking at that property, but this is where you're going to be able to see, okay, well, am I actually asking for a time? Because it could be that it's bringing in the date, but if you don't have a time scheduled, it might not show that up. So if we want to head to a property now, we can pop in some dates.
It is going to just be time. I'm just going to throw that in. I know you're doing it.
It'll
right now.
just be the time,
but it is going to be just the time. So you could do the date, but then you
Awesome.
can also add the time. Yeah. So you could put all three together if you want to. It just depends on what you're trying to do.
Awesome. So Kate, we popped in the date. Let's go ahead and pop in a start time. Now that we've
That's a
added that in
real
there,
quick inspection.
now that we've added in there, when we go to emails and we go to add in a smart block or see what a smart block looks like, we're going to click on the same exact merge field sort of view right there with the 3 dots and the 3 lines. We'll click on smart block. And then we're going to look for that specific smart block. And this note up here at the top, this is really crucial. This is telling you that if you just copy and paste it into the body of the email, you're going to see a ton of HTML code. It's going to say a bunch of stuff and you're going to be like, this isn't what I wanted. What we're going to want to do is click on the source code button right there. Perfect.
Oh,
and we'll paste it
Before you
into
do
the
that,
source
do you
code.
want to show them just what it looks like? Just in case they,
Oh, sure.
they
Yeah.
do
Go ahead.
accidentally
Paste it in there,
copy
Jana.
it, paste. Yeah, so it's going to look a little weird. It's going to look a little bit like that. So that's not the way you obviously want it to look. So you want to actually put it in if you're testing it. Now, if you're applying that smart block in an email template, it's going to convert it for you. But if
Mhm.
you're trying to look at it and test the smart block, you
On a
do have to put
property.
it into that code view. So yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
That's good. Yeah.
Paste that
And
in there.
source code, it can seem a little daunting. Oh, I have to get into the code. It's really not anything too fancy. It just gives us an environment where we can work with those divs. And it should be blank if this is a blank email. If you already have content in the body of this email, you will see information in here. Just keep in mind the div is what separates your lines. So,
And who knows, maybe when we do group onboarding class, if you guys are really interested in it, maybe I teach a basics HTML class. So you guys can start having fun with it. Maybe, I don't know. I have to think about it. But if you
but
can
with
see-
that, you can, oh yeah, sorry.
Perfect. It's reflecting correctly.
So with that, it does include the ampersand, what time we set up for that. It does have the date there. And again, conditional logic, I manually pulled this in, but if you had that in your email template, the logic in this case that we put in there is, if the home inspection date is not blank, which means it's been scheduled, is when this would become relevant. So depending on the smart block you're looking to build, Katie, I would see like when is it needed in your process to build that condition logic around it. And then as far as the time merge fields, just keep in mind, we do need to click on start or end, and this is only going to show up for date specific fields in your account. As you can see, this is not a date field, so it does not have that as an option. Really good question there too, by the way, Katie. Can we go over how to create a table in property history? Yes. So this is one we've been getting some really good questions on lately as well with tables. In your account, you should see this little house icon. This is your property view, which is a little bit more like a spreadsheet type view in the system. With these different views that we have set here, I may want to have different tables that I toggle between. And from there, I may want to segment my tables down a little bit further so that way I can see some additional insights, details. So
Hey, Jenna,
with
before you
this
get too far, I just want to call out a difference too, because I just know the term property history. We do have a property history widget on the dashboard itself. There isn't really a way to set filters on those, but if we're dealing, which is what I would recommend, is setting up a property table, which is what Jenna's showing here. That's where you have a lot more control over what you want to see, and you can filter it down to very specific information dealing with the segments that Jenna's about to talk about. But that is different than the property history on the widget. The widget is just literally showing you the last properties that you have seen, and it's just a very quick widget. No other options,
Functionality so far with
so
that
if you
one.
go
Yeah,
to the dashboard,
that's a
just
really
to show
good
real
point.
quick, yeah, property history, it's just showing you those last 25 results. What's the last thing you looked at, period. So I just want to call it a quick difference, just because I noticed that term there.
Yeah, that's a good point to make.
Yeah, I'm hearing it called property view oftentimes under this home tab, and then property history. Yeah, it's either dashboard or depending on where you're at, you can also access it in the top header with your history dropdown. Good addition there, Matthew, because that has been one. If you don't see anything on your dashboard when you start out, you can always add in the widgets that are relevant for you and your team. So definitely make sure that you have some of those key widgets there for your quick reference. But with tables, the idea is I can set filter parameters for my different tables that I create in my account. I think the easiest way to understand the difference between tables and segments is a table is your big bucket. If I want to segment what's in that bucket down further, I'm going to create a segment. So any segments you create relate to the table that you have selected. So if I wanted to see my closed transactions in this account, I have my table selected to close transactions. If you don't have anything in this list, you can always create new, and then we'll walk you through how to set some of your filter parameters. Once you have the base of your table created, then you can come over to this left-hand view. If it looks like this for you, that just means our filter table needs to be expanded with, which is this arrow icon. But you're going to see a couple of different filter parameters you can select. With your date range, if I select this drop down, I do have a couple of options to choose from. I can hard code a specific date range or choose one of these selections here. Once I have a date range selected, then I can change my date filter that I see. One common thing that held me up when I was starting out with the system was I was trying to choose a different date filter option, but it wouldn't let me. I just had created date. It's because I did not set a date range yet. So if you open up this field here, date filter field, and only see created date, come back to date range, set up something here, and then you can come back to this. What this is doing is saying, I want to see all of my closed properties in 2023 so far, so year to date. From there, I can also specify client type if I need to. I'm actually going to clear this for my table. I just want to see all. This status is not accurate either for closed properties, so I would want to clean that up a bit. And we'll select closed. So with this particular filter now, it's showing me all closed properties for 2023. Now, what if I want to segment that further and say, I just want to see my closed properties for 2023? The first thing that I'm going to do, one, is make sure that all of the fields that I want to see here for this table, I have selected. So I can control what columns that are showing up here. If that is something you guys need to adjust, you should see this table columns button down at the bottom. And these are the current table columns that you see. If you need to remove one, you can always hit that trash can icon. If you need to rearrange them, you can. Say, close that out. And then if you need to add in some new ones, you can do that as well. So let's do home inspection due date. Once I select that.
Sorry, would you also add in a contact? Because that was one thing that came up too recently in implementation was, could I actually add my contacts to this table view too? So just want to show we can add contacts too.
Let's do seller as well. Yeah, so essentially as we're clicking through all of those, you can see they're added to that right-hand side. So once I hit update, my table will refresh and I can now see the different fields, contacts in my current table that I have selected. So that is specific to the table I select. If I want to have different columns in my active pending list, I can. Again, this left-hand menu here and the settings that I set up are specific to the table or segment that I'm in. So let's go back to that example. If I want to segment this down further and just see my transactions for 2023, I'm going to come through and create new segment.
Now, if you're on your own team, you might only see yours. This is if you're on a team where you have multiple users on that team and you can kind of see everyone's. But if you have your own individual teams and you're the only individual user, then this might not be applicable.
Yeah. And that's one too, like it brings up a broader conversation we see around teams in general. Oftentimes we do see users as they're getting set up in their accounts where they're coming back to their team setup and making sure that things look good to go and they have that kind of sharing permissions correct. Because your teams, let's say I'm on a team with Hannah and I'm the listing coordinator, Hannah's the transaction coordinator. We want to be able to see each other's files because we work on the same files at that point. Well, what if we have another team and it's just one person that handles their own files completely? They don't need to have our properties come into their view and vice versa. And so if you need to control who is seeing what or who has access to what, that is your team set up under organization and users. If you're on that team, that means that you have access to any properties assigned to that team. Whether those properties are directly assigned to you, we will touch on in a quick second. So first things first, this is a pretty straightforward account. I only have one team set up. So I'm going to select that. And then from there, I'm going to select the appropriate team member in that team that I want to filter down to. So in this case, it is myself, implementation demo. And that would now allow me to say, here's my closed deals 2023 out of my closed transaction table that I have set here. Now, if I toggle this again, back to a different table, let's go to active pendings. I'm not going to see that segment that I just created because my segments live within my table that I create. So here it is. So I hope that helps with your question there, Lynn. Definitely feel free to send in some follow-ups if you have any on tables and segments specifically. Otherwise, I know we're getting a little closer to time, so we're going to pop on to the next question. Yes, Jeffrey.
I'm going to take care of Jeffrey's, but do you want to grab Jessica's next?
Yep. And I do want to just highlight that while we're on call with everyone too. We do actually offer some one-on-one training options with Open to Close as well. It is paid one-on-one training typically. We do have a 6-call package that you guys can sign up for. The current rate for that is $4.99 for the 6-call package. And from there, we are looking at some additional tools and resources that will go along with that. But if you guys are interested, just reach out to help@opentoclose.com. Let them know what you're interested in, and they'll direct you to the appropriate team member at that point.
Perfect.
Next question with Jessica here. We have a contact role that is required twice, lender, in our buyer intake form and can't figure out why it is coming in twice. I reached out to support and they responded, perfect. Yes. So oftentimes these types of questions, support may be directing you guys to these Wednesday workshops on Wednesdays because that allows us to go over it live, which can be pretty handy if we have some follow-up questions or want to see some more details. So the first thing that I would do, make sure I pull up the intake form that I'm troubleshooting. I'm going to start out with my contacts tab because when I look at this contacts tab, anyone in this role list is going to be prompted for every single time I fill out this intake form. So for your account, Jessica, I would see if you have lender here under this contacts tab to start, because that may be where one of those duplicates is coming from. Now, if you haven't been to this contacts tab before, you can add a contact role to be prompted here by choosing them from this drop down. You can also select if this contact is required to be added when submitting the intake form or if it's optional. If you need to adjust something over here, you can. But as you can see in our current pre-built account, we don't have the lender being prompted for here. And the reason for that is if this is a cash deal, I don't have a lender contact to pull into my intake form. So that is where conditional content when I'm filling out the intake form is going to be built and controlled under form conditions. So this would be the next place that I would recommend you checking out to see, is there any form condition that is also asking or pulling in that lender contact when you're filling out the form. Let me see if I can find a good example. I don't remember if we did this one or not. But we're just going to add it into this one because I cannot go find it through all of that. So oftentimes what I find is that we actually have an additional contact role being pulled in through that form condition we see here. So for quick example, what it would look like is something like this. So if this condition is met, I've said that we did not waive that finance contingency, there is a loan, then I'm going to say the lender contact is required. So those are two of the likely places I would start with. If you're not seeing that lender contact under your form conditions or under your contacts tab, but you're still seeing the duplicates, at that point, we likely will need to take a little bit deeper of a look specifically at your account to see maybe we need to do some type of refresh with your cache. It's holding on to that last saved version. But sometimes that does get me. Maybe I went to make a change to the back end of my intake form as I was filling it out, and I cannot get my intake form to refresh and show that correctly. If you've made a change to this, and this is a prime example, I just opened up this intake form and it's not starting at my normal point. I can already see that some of these fields are required. I didn't select any of my questions yet. That may be because we started filling this out previously. We need to cancel that form out and start over to get that full refresh of things. So that would be the other thing I would check out. If you have already maybe corrected part of the change and it's not reflected, cancel your form, start a new one, and see if those conditions and that logic is working correctly now. hope that helps. But if you have any follow-ups, definitely let us know. And Matthew too, I know you've done a lot of troubleshooting on intake forms like that. Any additional points you have to add in? Hannah too?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. I don't know if it's fully related, but it'd be just the matter of field. So with like form conditions, you can bring in a field based on this condition or this rule, right? And you can bring in some fields. However, looking at the actual fields page, or if you're using triggers to bring it onto the property after that point, the form conditions only dynamically update the intake form as you're filling it out. So triggers is a way you could bring in those fields onto the property if you need it to be conditional, or if you just use the default fields themselves. So kind of two different paths to get to the same place, just depending on your situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We kind of touched on it a little bit before, how we were talking about, if we're going to ask the question, then we need to know, is there any additional fields that we need to ask on that intake form conditions? Do we need to bring those fields onto the actual property themselves? We need a form trigger to make sure to bring that answer on, or the reply onto it. So you can see kind of in the pre-built account, we have it that when we ask the question, waived seller disclosure, it brings on that seller disclosure due days in the due date field. Well, I know that we also have a form condition that when I say that the seller disclosure isn't being waived, so no, we need it, that it also brings on that day field due to my form conditions. You can probably see it better reflected in the HOA. Or yeah, perfect. It's on there. Wonderful. So you can see here, I've got that form condition. It brings it on. And then I've also got that trigger, that form trigger that also brings that answer onto the property itself. Yeah, Jessica, the other thing I would probably suggest is to clear your cache too. I may have taken a look in your account. I tried to look through your form conditions. They look wonderful, by the way. But I would just clear your cache too. Do exactly what Janice said, where she, canceled that form, clear your cache, double check your conditions, double check that your contacts are only being brought on when you need them to, or if they're brought on every time, that's fine. But yeah, from that point, if it's still showing up, then yeah, definitely we might need to take a deeper look.
I think the one thing I'll mention here with the form conditions specifically is to be careful when you have a condition, which is again kind of like a rule, and you have multiple rules dealing with the same exact field. You can get some wonky stuff. I've seen some things where the client type is buyer, right? So then I want to bring these things in, but then they have if it's the property type is condo, remove these fields or add these other fields. And if there's an overlap, you can see some weird stuff. So just be careful with the overlap. If you have multiple rules dealing with the same fields, just be a little careful there with trying to overlap, because you're literally telling two different things to do different things with the same exact field. So
we're saying bring
I've
this on,
I've seen some weird
remove
stuff.
this if it's this. Yeah. No, and I think that's a good point. One thing with the form conditions that I like to stress, because a lot of people ask me this, why can't we do this, Hannah? Form conditions always deal with adding on. It will always be equal to. So it's never going to be if it's equal to, or it's not equal to this, then do this. It'll always be, if the answer is this, what do we want to happen next? Now the triggers is where we're able to ask that more. Well, if it's not equal to this, or if it's not blank, you're able to kind of determine that particular part of the trigger a little bit more. Like you can get a little different with it, but Jenny, you're in the field. What did you want to add before I keep rambling?
I think just really going back to this again, fields are the foundation of everything. Your organization of your fields is a huge impact to this as well.
Yeah.
The reason why we stress like using field sections to separate your types of data is so that way, if you have an addition, let's say I come down the line, I'm working with a home warranty company where I have an additional question I need to be able to, ask, and then also have that value data live in my property. I'm going to add it to my home warranty field section, because my form triggers, if I build them correctly, they're adding in my field section when I say, yes, a home warranty is relevant. If I had that home warranty field added into a, let's say, big bucket field section with a lot of other things, that's where you start to deal with needing to remove data more and more. I think a really good example of, when do I need to remove some of that data is actually like disclosures. We don't have it in this one per se, but lead-based paint. Normally that's an additional date that you're tracking for a lot of teams. Depending on your area, maybe it's a whole field section because you have several different details to it. If it's just one field, I don't necessarily always create one field section for it. Again, probably not great use case, but lead-based paint's not always needed. So I may put it in this disclosure field section and then use a form trigger to say, if this home is built after 1978, or if there's no lead-based paint deadline, but we'll pull in that field section, but remove this one field from it because I know it's not needed. So as much as possible, like think through the strategy of how you want to have your field sections. What parts of your contract are you tracking details on? As you can see here, almost every part of the contract has its own field section. So we can get that control and hopefully alleviate the need of removing as much information from your record. It's more so that adding and removing on those special use cases.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, really good point there. And if you guys, as always, have questions on that, definitely feel free to let us know, like, what is your specific use case? The more details you guys give on, here's what I'm trying to do with this situation, that really does help us with clarifying some of these questions down the line as well.
Definitely.
One last question in queue. I know we're close to time.
Just before we move on, I will just kind of piggyback on whether it's something you're looking for help with, or even just maybe some sort of bug or issue or anything you're struggling with. A video will go miles and miles for us to try and help out. It just sometimes those videos can show some details that we may not know to ask you about that, and you may not know to show us that. But those videos, especially because sometimes, like even a screenshot, I've had people send me a screenshot that's just a little
too ambiguous
by 2 inch screen, and I need to see the full screen. So I'm just going to say that if you could show us everything again with a video, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video could do so much more, and it helps us out a ton. So I just want to throw that out there for the support team.
Yeah, definitely. With that in mind, I think we just have that one last question on our defaults and settings for our rollover option.
Yes.
Bad property to test. Let's do a different one. So what is defaults and settings for newcomers? This is a tab in your property record where you can come in and say, here's the default time zone, here's my default date calculations, default texting number, send from, etc. When we look at these default date calculations, we get this question a lot of times of, well, I set this to NA, or I set this to count federal holidays and count days using business, and my dates aren't calculating correctly, or my tasks aren't populating correctly, or they're not rolling over correctly. The main thing to keep in mind is this defaults and settings for your date calculations. This applies to anything that was not preset to something other than NA in your date templates, your task templates, really any dates in the system. So for example, if I come over to a bad example, I'm going to go to the back end really quick. If I go over to a task template here, and I'm setting up this date timeline option, and I have NA selected for all three of these, if the property that I'm on as their defaults and settings set to roll over, right? And then count federal holidays, then the system is going to take this NA and use the defaults and settings, because that's how that NA option is set. Is I don't need individual control for how this task or how this date rolls over. I'm going to let the system use the defaults that I put in place. So if you need something other than your defaults and settings, maybe you set NA here as your rule of thumb, but you need specific tasks or specific dates to have that rollover option, you're going to want to build it directly in the task itself. So refresh on that, find the task you need, come to your little calendar icon. You're going to see it when this task is being populated as due with that rollover option that I can select. Again, quick thing before I leave, if I have NA here, it will use the defaults and settings and whatever preferences that I put there if I have this still selected to NA. So anywhere you see that in the system, so that task templates, same concept for your date templates. when I'm creating my deadline here, if I need these to roll over because my contract says in Colorado that it rolls over to the next business day if it lands on a federal holiday, I'm going to select that as my option because I'm in Colorado. You guys in your area, you should probably be using whatever your contract is stating and whatever rules you need to adhere to at that point. But set it in the individual date, the individual date option instead of the defaults and settings if you need something other than NA. So trying to keep that somewhat simple because I know it's a little bit confusing if you're not used to setting those up just yet. If you guys have questions on that as we move forward, definitely reach out and let us know. Otherwise, we are at time. So any last points that Matthew, Hannah, before we wrap up?
I think that's perfect.
100%.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys so much for coming to this week's Wednesday workshop. We appreciate your time and your questions. The more questions we have, the more that we can dig into the specific strategies that you're trying to build for your account. So appreciate you guys. I hope to see you next time and have a wonderful rest of your week.